What can we learn from Mat Honan? Mat Honan is a reporter who some years ago got hacked, as he put it, epically hacked, and related the story of what happened, what the mistakes were along the way, for people to learn from. And it's worth looking at, even these years later, at exactly what he went through, what the mistakes were, and what you and I might want to take away from his epic hacking. What can we learn from Mat Honan? Mat Honan is a reporter for Wired magazine whose digital life was effectively destroyed due to account hacks and lax security policies. There are important lessons here. I'm Leo Notenboom. This is askleo.com. A thank you to the patrons of Ask Leo for making this video, audio, and Ask Leo itself possible. askleo.com/patron for more information and access to exclusive content. Update, December 2019. The events prompting this article and the admonitions within it date back to the summer of 2012. It's hard to believe it's been 7 years. It's even harder to believe how little has changed and how timely this story and its lesson remains. How Apple and Amazon security flaws led to my epic hacking on Wired.com is a tale of account hacks leading to the compromise of several accounts and ultimately the irretrievable destruction of precious data, including photos of the author's infant daughter. The tale of woe features lax security from the author and major services, all of whom should have known better. The author watched as it happened, powerless to stop it. It makes for chilling reading, and I strongly recommend you review it to see how horribly things can go wrong. Let's look at the lessons learned and some of the steps you and I can take to avoid or at least seriously minimize the risk of ever experiencing something similar. Back up. Seriously, back up. I really want to drive it home with this quote from the Wired article. Quote, "Had I been regularly backing up the data on my MacBook, I wouldn't have had to worry about losing more than a year's worth of photos covering the entire lifespan of my daughter or documents and emails that I had stored in no other location." End quote. For more emphasis, quote, "that I had stored in no other location," end quote. I say it again and again. If there's only one copy, it's not backed up. I don't care if it's on your hard disk, your quote-unquote backup drive, or some kind of cloud thingamajig. If there's only one, it can disappear in an instant. If you take away only one thing from anything I ever say, write, or do, please let it be about backing up. Nothing can save you from almost any possible disaster more than a proper and current backup. Learn from Mat Honan's loss. Had he backed up, his story would have been about a major inconvenience, but nothing more. As it is, some of his most precious data is gone forever. Isolate your accounts from each other. Quoting the victim, quote, "My accounts were daisy-chained together. Getting into Amazon let my hackers get into my Apple ID account, which helped them get into Gmail, which gave them access to Twitter." End quote. We often talk about how important it is to have different passwords for different accounts. If a hacker manages to get your password at service A, then he may well be able to log in to services B, C, and D if you use the same password on all four. That's not what happened here. In this case, using the same email addresses for the accounts allowed the hacker to exploit vulnerabilities in the I lost my password recovery process to gain access. So, how do you isolate your accounts from each other? Use different email addresses as usernames at different services. Don't use the primary email for one service as the recovery or alternate address at another. The problem? Those guidelines are very inconvenient. Multiple email accounts. Using different email addresses for each account prevents a hacker from using common information about you, like a single primary email address, as a foot in the door to compromise one or more of your services. Unfortunately, managing multiple email addresses can be anything from mildly annoying to a downright pain. If you own a domain, say your very own domainname.com, then you can have an unlimited number of email addresses on that domain. You can set up separate email addresses for each of the services you want to isolate. You might set up Amazon at your very own domainname.com and Apple at your very own domainname.com, and so on. Each would be configured to automatically forward to your real email address, so you don't have to actually manage multiple email accounts and inboxes, only email addresses that all forward to a single destination. Some services, including Gmail, support a technique known as subaddressing, which lets you set up unique email addresses that automatically land in your single inbox. You simply use the plus sign to add a unique identifier to your email address. If your email address is example@gmail.com, then you might use example plus amazon@gmail.com as your amazon.com email address. Some services support creating aliases to additional email addresses, which work very much like the two examples above. The aliases are all different email addresses that all deliver to a single email account. And of course, many email services don't support a convenient solution at all. Your only solution there is to create more email accounts or use a provider that has the functionality I've listed above. Recovery email addresses. Mr. Honan's story begins with the hackers discovering that the recovery email address for his Gmail account is an apple.me account. Even though Gmail's I forgot my password page obscured the email address as m*n@me.com, knowing that .me accounts are usually first name last name @me.com, the hackers were able to decipher it. Normally that alone wouldn't be enough, but if you read the account of what progressed, you can see why it was. One thing quite literally led to another. One fairly simple solution to at least some of this daisy chaining of accounts is to set up a separate recovery email address and use that rather than the email address actually associated with an online service. The victim put it more clearly. Quote, "And I should have had a recovery address that's only used for recovery without being tied to core services," end quote. So rather than using your Facebook login email address as your Gmail alternate account, use a separate email address dedicated to account recovery as that alternate for Gmail. That way, compromising either won't act as a stepping stone to compromising the other. Once again, this calls for a new email address, perhaps recovery@yourveryowndomainname.com. or example plus recovery@gmail.com or some other email account or alias. Just make sure the recovery email address is not itself dependent on the service it might be used to recover. For example, don't set up example plus recovery@gmail.com to recover your example@gmail.com account. You might not have access when you need it the most. And if it is a separate account, make sure to maintain it. Log in periodically to make sure it's not closed for lack of use. None of this should be necessary. In reality, aside from backing up, nothing I've discussed should be required. Ideally, account recovery procedures would allow the legitimate account holder and only the legitimate account holder to recover their account credentials. The problem is that's a customer service nightmare. Make the recovery rules too easy and account breaches like this happen. Make the recovery rules too hard and you run the risk of preventing legitimate account holders from regaining access to their account if they lose even one small detail of required information. As a result, many companies set up policies trying to make the recovery process both secure and customer-friendly. Unfortunately, those two are often at odds. As I've said before, people forget their passwords much more often than we might expect. The recovery process exploited in this case relied on fundamentally bad policies, not bad technology. Both Apple and Amazon have changed their policies since. While it's great that Apple and Amazon have improved security, it's too bad it took this very public and embarrassing episode to make it happen. But what about all of the other services that we use and rely on every day? How do we know their account recovery processes can't be exploited or circumvented? We don't. And that means that it's up to us to take on the responsibility to stack the deck a little more in our favor and minimize whatever damage might result, even if it does add a little inconvenience. That little inconvenience is nothing compared to the massive inconvenience of account loss, data loss, or even identity theft. Postscript: two-factor authentication. One of Mr. Honan's comments was, had I used two-factor authentication for my Google account, it's possible that none of this would have happened, end quote. Two-factor authentication, now more commonly available than back in 2012, means the email address and the password is not enough to gain access to an account. When enabled, two-factor authentication requires something you know, the standard username, password information, but also something you have. For instance, information from a device or mobile phone application which proves you're in possession of that particular device at the time you log in. I highly recommend it. While it doesn't solve every possible security problem, like using separate email addresses, it makes hacking your account significantly more difficult and therefore less likely. For links related to this article or to leave a comment, visit askleo.com/103465. I'm Leo Notenboom. This is askleo.com. Thanks for watching.